Hello, and welcome to Today in the World, where I'll be talking about news from around the world and giving you my thoughts. It looks like I'm just going to be going over some updates for a bunch of news stories today. I'm going to start with the update going on, obviously, in Bangladesh, where the Prime Minister has resigned and then fled the country. Then I'm also going to talk about what's going on with the war in Israel, everything that's going on there. And then there's also um, some more stuff happening in the South China Sea, Vietnam, Cambodia, Japan, and the Philippines. There's been stuff happening with those four countries, alliances and joint training sessions are happening. We'll be getting into that a little later. And then last, I'm just gonna give you my thoughts on the British protests, on how the media is covering the British protests, because obviously they are being, I think, incredibly dishonest. Um, I've been looking at the Canadian media, and it has been just it's it's been incredibly misleading. I think is a kind way to say it. So we're going to be talking about that as well. It's some days it feels like the world is falling apart, and today it seems like one of those days. And one thing, I do find this absolutely interesting to watch and to talk about, and I hope that I can get away with just being a spectator to it all. I kind of doubt that though. Um, so yesterday we did talk a little bit about the Bangladesh protests, and the news today that's breaking is that the Prime Minister Hasina has resigned and then she fled the country after it was reported that thousands of protesters stormed her official residence and other buildings that were associated with her party. Following her resignation, the military chief was looking for guidance on forming an interim government. They have also imposed an indefinite curfew in Bangladesh. Um, However, just because she resigned, that has not taken away from any of the tension. So while the army is currently in charge of the government, currently in charge of the country, they have imposed a curfew. They've said it's just been an indefinite curfew, presumably until an interim government is formed. Um, I hope that they actually do form an interim government and that elections do take place there soon. Well, I guess we'll find out. The Bangladesh protesters, they have not stopped protesting just because of the curfew that's been imposed. The curfew and the resignation follow deadly clashes where nearly 100 people were killed. Because of the resignation of the democratically elected leaders in Bangladesh, the army is in charge. Um, the army chief has promised that the new government will look into the deaths that have occurred during the protest. I don't know. I don't know if he can make that kind of promise to the protesters. Uh, I doubt that that's going to make any difference. I feel like they're just going to keep protesting anyways, um, because I think the protesters are looking for an immediate answer and an immediate investigation, not one that is delayed by putting together a new government and then proceeding from there. Um, Hopefully, this calms the protests down a little bit and there are no more violent clashes between the police, the military, and the protesters. I don't see that as a likely outcome. I think that the protests are going to continue. I don't think that they'll be any less violent than they previously were, especially considering that protesters were essentially allowed to storm the residence of the leader of the country. I I find that kind of interesting. Definitely something that I'm going to look into and see what happened there. because I think it's kind of unusual for protesters to be able to just storm a building like that, especially when protests have been going on for so long, and especially when the protesters have been calling for the resignation of the leader of the country. So we'll see what's happening there. And then I'm going to move to the Middle East. The Middle East is such a flashpoint right now. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has stated that Israel is already in a multi-front war with Iran. U.S. and Western allies are preparing to defend it from an expected counterattack. This comes after Iran claims that it has a legal right to respond to the assassination of the Hamas leader, which has been blamed on Israel. They take this legal claim from the superiority a country has within its own borders, and obviously the assassination the assassination would have violated that sovereignty. I know the U.S. does this all the time. They can get away with it, though. It would be a heck of a lot harder for Israel to be able to get away with something like this. And I don't find it likely that they will. I think Iran will look at ways they can essentially get back at Israel without without hopefully involving the U.S. or any Western allies. Iran reinstated that it believes that punishing Israel will prevent further instability in the Middle East, because Iran is not looking to escalate tensions that are already running high. Whether or not I believe that they do not want to escalate tensions is irrelevant, because I think that any retaliation that happens will escalate tensions, period. There's no way that any move Iran makes attacking Israel won't lead to escalation. I have seen reported that reports stating that Russia has been flying weapons and other military items into Iran. Obviously, that will be for the suspected offensive against Israel. It's also been interesting to see the defense stocks in the U.S. climb so high, so quickly. It looks like the defense contractors in the United States are preparing for war, and judging that these are stocks that a lot of Congress people in the United States own, they obviously would benefit from more happening. So I think it's going to be like the U.S. keeps putting up this front of, we're sending diplomats, we want to de-escalate the situation. Meanwhile, we have defense stocks climbing. We have these Congress people, these elected Congress people who are sitting, who have stocks in these essentially war companies. So I think the rich and powerful will benefit from a war happening. And then lastly, I'm going to touch on Hezbollah, because they've been firing rockets into Israel again after, I think, a 2 or 3 day break they had after the assassination of one of their leaders. So that's happening again. It doesn't look like there's been any serious damage as of yet. The Middle East, it's such a tense and interesting situation. Everybody just keeps calling for calm and more calm. And what we get is escalating tensions and escalating tensions and then more escalating tensions. And at what point do you just stop funding everybody's war all the time? That money that is being put toward the Middle East, toward Ukraine, could be better spent on 1,000 different things internally. Anyway, this is a flashpoint that everybody keeps saying could turn into the next World War III. I hope that it just ends up being a regional conflict or that it just ends up being a proxy war between the East and West, and that it just stays a regional proxy war. It is getting uglier and uglier there every day. And I think the world is almost preparing for an all-out war to break from that flashpoint. It remains to be seen. However, it's likely that with these tensions, we will see rising gas prices. And I think with rising gas prices, obviously, there are certain countries that stand to benefit from that. Definitely Venezuela will benefit from that with their reserves, because the U.S. will obviously be looking for ways to get gas prices down, to get their oil cheaper, and a number one way to do that would be to buy it from the dictator of Venezuela by reducing sanctions, or giving him some kind of carrot. And the other hot flashpoint is in the South China Sea. So Vietnam's Coast Guard has visited the Philippines for joint drills, as they are both facing increasing maritime tensions with China. Both the Philippines and Vietnam strongly condemn and criticize China's actions in the disputed waters. That's because the South China Sea is vital for global trade. There are important global trade routes that go through the South China Sea, and that is what's leading to strained tensions in the area. Due to the recent flashpoint between China and the Philippines have vowed to press on with efforts to strengthen their territorial forces and defense, as well as expand security alliances with other Southeast Asian countries and Western countries. We saw that, I forget if it was yesterday or 2 days ago, where they were looking at strengthening ties with Germany, and also a couple days ago we saw them strengthening ties with Japan, and now it looks like they are looking to strengthen ties with Vietnam. Japan, who's also in the area and is also an ally of the Philippines, has also began a string of visits to Southeast Asian countries. They started with Cambodia, interestingly, which is a Chinese ally, and then they'll move on to Vietnam after that. And this is kind of their way of attempting to counter China's increasing influence in the area. Japan is looking to upgrade its relations with Cambodia and Vietnam to strategic partnerships. Just as a side note on Cambodia and their allyship with China, a lot of people speculate that they are allies with China because of China's aid and investment in major infrastructure projects in Cambodia. I'm actually quite happy that the Philippines and Japan are starting to look at other Southeast Asian countries who are willing to cooperate with each other and form strategic alliances as a way of deterring Chinese power in the area. I think it's much better than always relying on Western countries to get involved, or relying on their strategic partnerships with the United States. I'm really happy to see that, honestly. I think it's better to leave the regional conflicts contained in that region. And I love when they form partnerships with each other, almost like the game that the great powers were playing prior to World War One. Of course, it's definitely different because these are smaller countries, are not great powers compared to China. So it's just it's interesting to see how these relationships form and change over time. And lastly, I'm just going to talk about the British protests again. I've been seeing so much about it. I'm happy that they're finally protesting about it. I think that's great. It breaks my heart that it took the killing of 3 young girls to do that. It's brutal that was the straw that broke the camel's back. I wish it happened sooner. And it's rough when you see the media cover this, claiming that it's just extreme right wingers that are doing this. I think that's so unfair. I think that anybody with half a brain would be protesting, especially after all the news that's been coming out of Britain, out of the UK, sorry, where you have all these rapes that are happening, these stabbings that are happening. You see people just getting beat in the streets while the police look on. And you have these media outlets misleading people, claiming that it's these far-right protests, these far-right extremists, when really what you have is far-left extremists running the newspapers. And watching all this go down, and still side against the victims. I wish Canada would take a lesson from this. It's very unlikely, though. Very docile there. It's a shame. That's all I have for you today. As always, if I've missed any international stories, please let me know. I can be reached via my email, todayintheworld2024@gmail.com, or in the comments section of wherever you watch this. I hope this was informative and you listen to me next time. I will continue to monitor these stories and let you know what's happening today in the world.